Hey, what up, guys? So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about data types. Like, what is a data type? Like, what does that even mean, right? So that's what we're going to be discussing. Data types are very important. Every programming language deals with data types. So we're going to be discussing what is a data type, what are the different types of data types that exist, and how does Python make determinations of data types. So that's what we're going to be discussing, guys, in this lesson. So again, guys, what are data types? So in programming, a data type is a classification of data which tells the compiler or interpreter, because we're dealing with interpreter here in Python, how the programmer tends to use the data. Programming languages support various data types, which include integer, characters, strings, floats, and booleans, right? So Python, right? We discussed this before, but Python is a dynamic language, which means it's going to determine what the data type should be. Okay. Now, that being said, there is some there is some assignments that you could do to make sure that certain values are determined a certain way. Like, let's say we're dealing with whole numbers, but you want them to be determined as string values. There's a way to do that. But in general, what Python does is based on what value you're giving it, it's going to dynamically determine what that data type should be. Not like other languages like C++, where you have to declare that data type up front. You have to specify this variable is going to be an integer, and then you assign an integer value to it, as an example. You cannot declare it as an integer, then try to assign a string value. You're going to get an error, right? But in Python, you don't have to do that. You just assign your value, and it knows it's a string, it's integer, again, integer, whole numbers, and so forth. So next, guys, let's kind of review what are some of the key data types that exist in programming. In this case, Python specifically, but these data types are pretty consistent to other languages as well. Now, there are some different names in other languages for the same type of object, and I'll now explain that in a minute. But overall, these are very key data types for Python and in general for other programming languages as well. So string is pretty much, think of it as text type values, right? Characters. Well, really what it is, characters. That's what string is. String is a list of characters. A sequence of characters is what determines what a string is. Characters could be, again, letters, like words, letters, but also it could include numbers in it as well. It doesn't have to be strictly letters only. It could be numbers as well. Integer. Now, integer is a whole number. That's the easy way to think of it. Now, there are different type of integers. Integer 2, integer 4, integer 8. That's ultimately the bit size of that integer, which means, it's bigger, right? From integer 4 to integer 8, the size of that integer grows drastically. But in Python, again, Python does that automatically for you. So you don't need to determine what type of integer you're dealing with, that you're dealing with integer 4, integer 8, etc. Again, Python will make that determination for you. Float is a decimal data type, right? So there are other data types that exist that are very similar to float. But again, we're going to stick with float. That's the main one. Float, think of it as decimals. Anytime you have a decimal value, that is your float data type. Boolean. Boolean is true or false. Think of it that way. A lot of times it's represented as 0 and 1 or true or false. But nevertheless, that is what your Boolean data type is. So anytime you need a true or false type statement that you're going to be evaluated, is this true? Like, good example would be x greater than, let's say if x happens to be 5 and the equation is if x is greater than 10, well, it's going to give you back either true or false, right? That is a Boolean result. List. So list is literally a list of items. You have an object,
And inside that object, you would have many items in there. Let's say, for example, a good example for a list would be you want to get all of the addresses in your block, and you're going to put them in a list. So now you have a list object that will contain many items, and every item will be every house address, right? So if you need to process or iterate over, now you have a list of all the addresses. That's an example. Now, in other languages, list is not called a list. It may be called array. So they're kind of, think of, to some degree, interchangeable. It may be called array. Some people may call them arrays. Other people call them list. Other languages, you will specify an array object. And in Python, though, we call it list. Another object that we have is a tuple. So a tuple, again, it's an object that contains items inside. Now, the thing that makes tuple different than some of the other data types is it's the items that are packed inside your tuple cannot be modified, right? So you cannot be changing these values. A tuple was kind of designed to, you're creating this object with all of these attributes, these items in this object, and that's it. It's not changing. It's going to stay consistent, and it's going to stay static for the rest of the process. So that is not designed to be. It's not designed to change, right? Another data type is dictionaries. So again, a dictionary is very, very similar to a JSON object. But again, if you're new in general, JSON object, you're probably asking, well, I don't know what a JSON object is. But ultimately, a dictionary is considered, you have an object, and inside that object, you have what's called a key value pair. So this is where you kind of assign a key name, then there's a value assigned to that. And again, I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to show some examples in more detail of what all of these data types are. But again, just want to kind of give you a quick introduction of the different data types that we're going to be dealing with here in Python. There are some other data types that are not listed on here that I will discuss later on in the advanced course. But these are the key data types that you need to know. If you know these data types and you know them well, this is going to be the core of the data types that you will be using in your programming journey as you go. Hopefully, guys, these videos are beneficial. I have additional lessons coming after this that's going to go over each data type in more details. So be on the lookout for those lessons. And thanks for watching, and y'all take care. Peace.